NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default.
The United States is not spying on ordinary people who don't threaten our national security.
I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
It's entirely appropriate for a program to exist to look at foreign data.
What Snowden is trying to draw attention to is the degree to which we are on a road to total surveillance.
The work we do is addressing directly threats to this country, to our way of life, to this country and to people who live here.
You can't come forward against the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and be completely free from risk, because they're such powerful adversaries that no one can meaningfully oppose them. If they want to get you, they'll get you in time.
It's emerged that it was the Prime Minister who instructed Britain's most senior civil servant to tell the Guardian newspaper to destroy a computer which held files from the whistleblower Edward Snowden.
We were faced effectively with an ultimatum from the British government that if we didn't hand back the material or destroy it, they would move to law. I don't think that we had Snowden's consent to hand the material back. And I didn't want to help the UK authorities know what he had given us.
The paper, which had other copies of the Snowden files overseas, agreed to take an angle grinder to the computer while the intelligence agents watched.
I think the plain fact is that what has happened has damaged national security, and in many ways the Guardian themselves admitted that when they agreed, when asked politely by my National Security Advisor and Cabinet Secretary to destroy the files they had, they went ahead and destroyed those files.
In America, the White House spokesman was asked, would Obama ever do such a thing?
That's very difficult to imagine a scenario in which that would be appropriate.
I love this country. Do you love this country?
How do you answer that question?
We live in a democracy. Most of the people working on this story are British people who have families in this country who love this country. I'm slightly surprised to be asked the question, but yes, we are patriots. And one of the things we are patriotic about is the nature of the democracy and the nature of a free press and the fact that one can in this country discuss and report these things.
I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic model. When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy.
In this directive, I have taken the unprecedented step of extending certain protections that we have for the American people to people overseas, which will limit the duration that we can hold personal information while also restricting the use of this information.
I don't want to live in a world where everything that I say, everything I do, everyone I talk to, every expression of creativity or love or friendship is recorded.
Hello, it's terrific to be here in Athens. I can't believe that Theo stole my T-shirt, but anyway. It's great to be here. My name's Luke Harding. I'm a journalist on The Guardian, and I was one of the reporters who worked on the incredible Edward Snowden story. And I think if I were standing here in front of you 2 years ago, or I'd sort of tried to sell this as a book idea to my literary agent, and I'd said, there's a 29-year-old American, he lives in Hawaii, he works for the National Security Agency, the world's most secret spy organization. Oh, his girlfriend's a pole dancer. He's stolen hundreds of thousands of top-secret documents and flown to Hong Kong, where he's given them to journalists. I think my literary agent would have said, look, that's just so ridiculous, that will never, ever happen. But actually, that's precisely what did happen. In 2012, Edward Snowden, then completely obscure, now, of course, world famous, decided that he was going to blow the whistle. He'd become increasingly disillusioned with American spying, and he felt that in the years after 9/11, that the enormously powerful American security state had stopped spying on the bad guys, on terrorists, on Al-Qaeda, and had started spying on everybody, on you, on American citizens, on Europeans, and so on. And so he came up with this kind of incredible plan, basically, to share secret information. He decided he would leak it to journalists. The problem was he was in Hawaii. He didn't know any journalists, but he liked Glenn Greenwald, who blogged on civil liberties and was a columnist on my newspaper, The Guardian. And in autumn of 2012, he sent a kind of very cryptic email to Glenn Greenwald saying, I am a senior member of the intelligence community. I may have something of interest. And I interviewed Glenn for my book in Rio de Janeiro. And Glenn is one of these people who is perennially busy. He lives in a tropical rainforest. He and his partner have got about 12 stray dogs. You talk to him, he's on the phone, he's got 4 chat windows open, he's got a kind of mutt jumping on his head. And he saw the email, he didn't really do anything about it. And then so Snowden tried again a couple of weeks later. He made an encryption video, a kind of tutorial for dummies for Glenn Greenwald to try and kind of reach through to him. Showed him how to download encryption software, said that you need a very good password whenever you're doing anything kind of digital. And Snowden came up with a suggestion, which was, and I kid you not, Margaret Thatcher is 100% sexy. I don't know if Greece can remember Margaret Thatcher, but I assure you that is not true. But anyway, Margaret Thatcher is 100% sexy. And incredibly, Glenn didn't do it. And so Snowden, who was basically trying to leak more intelligence material than anyone else in history, must have been deeply frustrated, and he tried a different track, which was to reach out to Laura Poitras, who was a documentary filmmaker based in Berlin, whom he trusted, and they had a kind of very ginger kind of correspondence, because Laura was worried that she was being entrapped. Snowden called himself Citizen 4, and they swapped information. And he basically explained that he felt American spying was unconstitutional, that it was illegal, and he wanted to meet and to do something about it. And basically, events at the beginning of last year, they kind of went into fast forward. By spring of last year, Snowden was ready to do this leak. And told Laura that he would meet her, and Laura flew to the US with Glenn and a third member, a wonderful colleague of mine called Ewan McCaskill, who's a Scottish reporter on The Guardian. I don't know if you watch Star Trek in Greece, but he sounds like Scotty, the original Scotsman from Star Trek. He says kind of I rather than yes. But he's also a brilliant, brilliant reporter, and the three of them flew to Hong Kong, and they met with Snowden in the Mirror Hotel, initially Glenn and Laura. And what was astonishing about this meeting, and it's the beginning of my book, is that they had no idea who Snowden was. They only had his name, and they hadn't searched his name in Google because that was too dangerous. They just had a rendezvous point, which was a kind of plastic crocodile in a kind of shopping strip next to the hotel. And so they see this figure holding a Rubik's Cube. This was part of the kind of protocol, who comes shambling towards them. And they'd expected a sort of CIA guy in his 60s with a blue blazer, gold glasses, dandruff, like off of the Bourne Conspiracy. And instead they get this kind of student who Glenn said, he looked barely old enough to shave. That was Edward Snowden. They went upstairs and they began talking, and it quickly became clear that Snowden was indeed not just a source, but probably the greatest journalistic source ever. And Ewan McCaskill also interviewed Snowden. We kind of collaborated together on this book, and we journalists involved on this story, we did sort of spycraft as well, but very, very badly, kind of sub-Hollywood spycraft. And so Ewan had been told that if Snowden was genuine, he should tap out on his text phone the Guinness is good, and if he was fake, the Guinness is bad. So the greatest leak in history, the switch was flicked when Ewan, on the Tuesday night of this extraordinary Hong Kong week, typed out, "The Guinness is good." And that was it. And then we started publishing a series of stories in London and in New York about the fact that Americans' phone records were all being secretly collected, about the PRISM program, which then no one had heard of, but essentially that the NSA was hacking into the servers of Yahoo, of Google, of all the digital platforms we use all the time. And it was a kind of roller coaster. I was part of the team in London that was dealing with this. And pretty quickly, we came into conflict with the British authorities. Now, you saw on the video, you saw David Cameron, who is not a great prime minister. He went to Eton. For those of you who don't know, it's the most privileged, expensive private school in the UK. And he's someone who's used to getting his own way. And he was basically fed up that we were publishing this material. And he, 2 weeks on after we started publishing, he kind of pointed to the most senior civil servant in the British government, a guy called Sir Jeremy Hayward. And I think he sort of said, basically, Sir Jeremy, deal with these rotters from The Guardian, deal with them. And so Sir Jeremy came to our offices in London, in King's Cross, and basically threatened us with legal action and said that unless we stopped sort of publishing stories, we had to return this material, we would be hauled up before a judge and possibly even closed down. And we explained, Alan Rusbridger, my editor, explained that this was pointless because this material already existed in Berlin, with Laura Poitras in Rio, with the New York Times, and so on. And Sir Jeremy said, this is the authentic voice of aristocratic Britain, said, essentially kind of, the Prime Minister thinks The Guardian is a lot more important than some American blogger. Some American blogger being Glenn Greenwald, the most famous journalist on the planet. And then he added, and this is the killer line, "You should feel flattered the Prime Minister thinks you are important." So that was the British government's response to this sensational story. We continued publishing. I was in the kind of secret bunker. What we tried to do was what Snowden had told us to do, which was to publish stories about the mass surveillance of civilians of high public importance, not about operational matters, terrorism, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. But this brought us into a kind of deepening conflict with the British government, and eventually we were told, unless you smash your computers up, we will close you down. And two middle-aged spies from GCHQ, that's the British equivalent of the NSA, came to The Guardian on a quiet Saturday morning, and we symbolically agreed to destroy our hard drives, which you saw there. And it was a surreal episode. They told us to buy drills, they said buy face masks. They produced something which looked like a small microwave oven called a degausser, which destroys magnetic data. And we said, we're not going to use your degausser, we don't trust you. And they said, yes, you will. It costs £30,000. And we said, okay, we'll use your degausser. So we smashed this stuff up. And that was the end of the Snowden files. And I mean, I think it was, I write in my book, I describe it as kind of part Stasi and part pantomime. But I think for people who care about press freedom, it was very chilling. The extraordinary thing was that the two spies had spent 2 weeks staking out our building, and they left with presents from Hamleys, the London toy store for their children, back to the provinces where the spy agency is headquartered. And I subsequently talked to one of the spies, Ian, about this, and he said that he wasn't so upset about the book, but he was upset about the implication that he was provincial. So provincialism, being the worst kind of offense. So what we know, thanks to Snowden, is a terrific man. I mean, I think Snowden has done us an enormous service. I think he's a major historical figure. I think we all owe him a debt. I mean, I don't know how many people have one of these. I guess everybody has one of these, right? So Snowden, the great genius of Snowden was that he actually turned over documents. He didn't merely assert. So we know now the iPhone is the most superlative spying device. The NSA boasts in its internal PowerPoints that people who have iPhones are zombies. So you're all zombies. And the NSA can remotely turn on your microphone. It's actually happened to me. If they do that, then your battery goes down very quickly. You go from full to zero in about 25 minutes. They collect your web searches. They collect your text messages, your emails, and also your geolocation data. In other words, there's a complete record of where you've been. If you go through your privacy settings, you can find that it's all being kind of collected. And so we've had a kind of enormous debate over the last year. On the one hand, I think politically, not a huge amount has changed. There have been some minor reforms from the Obama administration. I would say the British government is still in denial. The Germans are furious because Angela Merkel, whom we saw dressed as a Nazi earlier on, her phone was bugged by the NSA for 10 years. And for very understandable historical reasons, the Germans absolutely understand privacy and how important privacy is. But not much concrete political change, but I think that we as sort of citizens, we at least can now have a kind of proper, meaningful debate with our governments about the boundaries between privacy and national security. I'd be interested to know, for example, whether the NSA spied on the Greek Prime Minister or previous Greek Prime Ministers. Almost certainly the answer is yes. I'd be interested to know also how much the Greek government collaborates still with the NSA in sharing your data with America. But I think my message for this kind of lovely audience is twofold. I would say, despite all the Snowden revelations, stay cheerful, love each other, I would suggest. Let's not be too kind of scared. But I think it's also good to kind of take steps to safeguard our data. I mean, Snowden's great advice was, if you have an iPhone, to put it in the fridge. I've also discovered a cocktail shaker is very good. I don't know if you have cocktail shakers here in Athens, but put it in a cocktail shaker. It works as a Faraday cage. And I would say use encryption if you can. I think encryption works and is terrific. And just one final kind of story. When I was one of the reasons I care so much about the whole kind of idea of privacy is that I spent 4 years in Russia working for The Guardian as the Moscow bureau chief. And there I was kind of hacked by the KGB. I had unpromising young men in black leather jackets following me around. Whenever I made a joke about Vladimir Putin on the telephone, someone was listening and the line would go like this. I had people breaking into my flat. Really, it was a kind of badly written KGB drama. So I've had experience of demonstrative Russian spying, but I've also had experience of American spying as well. After I saw Glenn Greenwald in Rio last year for my book, all sorts of weird stuff happens for anyone who met Glenn Greenwald. And I was writing my manuscript back in the English countryside, and I wrote something very disparaging about the NSA, very rude about the NSA. And I watched my computer as my paragraph was remotely deleted from right to left, kind of like that. And I just thought, what the fuck? But this went on for 5 or 6 times over a period of 2 months, to the point where I'd actually leave notes from my mystery editor saying, look, I'm really not very happy that you like this, that you're doing this. Please don't delete stuff. And if it had been Hollywood, I'd have got a mysterious sort of disembodied reply. But I didn't. I didn't get a reply. But very unusual. All writers expect people to criticize their books after they're published. To be criticized when you're still writing it is something very new. So I would say thank you very much. I think privacy is a fundamental human right. I think Edward Snowden is a great person. He's in a difficult situation in Moscow. I think we are in his debt. I think we should thank Edward Snowden. Thank you.